we travel like, I don't know how many kilometers eastward from Munich to Vienna. There's a lot of travel back and forth. 500 kilometers eastward to Munich, where we'll meet Robert Korab, who's here already. So, Robert, Robert is he has a long history in maybe not cooperative, but definitely projects that shake the tree. For instance, he was one of the founding members, if I say correct, of the Sargfabrik project, which is in every publication or book, which is about collaborative housing or collective functions or new ways of organizing. The orange of the Sargfabrik jumps from the pages, and even in our black and white book you could see that it jumps to the cover of the book even maybe. So you cannot miss out Sargfabrik. He has now a company, Raum und Kommunikation, muss ich sagen. Raum und Kommunikation. Yeah. Started in 2015 together with others, amongst whom is Evelien Hendekli. DieWogen, the Woonprojekten Genossenschaft, which is a developer for cooperatives. It's a kind of mothership for new cooperatives to start from, cooperative projects. He has been a member also from various years in the jury of the Viennese development competitions and member of the Woonfonds Wien. And Woonfonds Wien is the big machine in Wien that produces this social housing of Vienna. And I think it's very interesting also to mention this membership of the jury of the development competitions, because he was one of the people who added an extra pillar to the model which went from, of course, finance, architecture, and I guess ecology or sustainability. Then there was the fourth pillar to the model called social sustainability. So how does it function on the long run, and how does it make society blossom and flourish? And I think that is really one of the things that is also, if you look at cooperative projects, especially when you're in Vienna and you walk around these bigger area developments, it's not hard to see which complexes, which houses are done by cooperatives. They literally shine out. Robert, I'm really happy that you can introduce us further to the Viennese model and situation. A big hand for Robert.
Thank you, Ari. Thank you. So, Ari asked me to sing my contribution. He asked me that I should sing it. I will not. Yes, I will give you a little bit an impression of the specific social binding of the Viennese social housing sector and its link to cooperatives, because there are also cooperatives in the old system and there are cooperatives in the new system, and there is a certain link and development, how it developed. And I will also guess a little bit about the problems, the Viennese social housing, which is very famous, but it has the same problems as other countries due to economic alteration of the economic system, economic pressure, land price, rising land prices and things like that. So it's also a big challenge for Vienna to keep its standard now. And I will give you a little bit an overview, so that you told who I am. What am I speaking about? A little bit current challenges for housing policies, not only in Vienna, but also all over Europe and all over the world. Then a little bit of a history of subsidized social housing in Austria, because it's on the one side it's a very special system, on the other side it has its roots in the monarchy. It's very old. It's more than 100 years ago. There was kind of welfare in social housing. So the Red Vienna originally originated in something that arose in the monarchy. Then a little bit of timeline, how did cooperative and social housing in Vienna evolve, because there were different stages. Then the recent challenges I told you, because we also have problems in Vienna. And then some example cases how cooperative procedures are fostering good city development. It's not only about building projects, but also about cooperation on the administrative level, on the level of town planning. And their cooperatives play a big role, and also the new cooperatives in Vienna play a big role in this process. And I will give you a glimpse of some examples of this district development. And then I'm turning to the core theme. The core theme is about new cooperative housing in Vienna. So we have a lot of examples, and some discussion of the typology, because there are different types of co-housing in Vienna, different corporations. We heard that Vienna has a very strong social housing sector, and the new cooperatives are more and more linked to this sector, and that's also a kind of strength. It's also a kind of limitation, because the new cooperatives are a little bit absorbed by the old system. So I will talk about that. And then some impressions from selected projects, so you can see some pictures. And then very important theme that's also linked to social sustainability, that co-housing groups are creators of the common good. That's very important thing. They are role models for the society. As you heard, they also have an important role in the development of districts, and this is also used by the city of Vienna. It's not only, they're doing good things, it's also positively used to bring in innovation into new developments. And maybe that's also a role model, could be interesting for you too. And then I have some points of what can you do to promote co-housing, because that's the theme of this symposium, to promote co-housing and encouraging words. Yeah. What are the current challenges? As you know, inequality is sharply rising, not only in Austria and not only in Europe. And I can show you some figures from Austria. You see at the left side, you see the so-called Gini coefficients. I think you know that's the ratio between the wealthiest and less wealthiest parts of the society, and it shows it's not only slightly rising, but you see inequality in general. That doesn't mean inequality in the housing sector. In generally is rising, and you see on the right side, you see the share of the net incomes of different parts of the population in Austria. You see there is a rising lower middle class in Austria. There is a strong upper medium middle class. It's not upper middle class. There is the right quarter is the wealthiest quarter of the population, and there is a small lowest class. It's because Austria and Vienna is a very social welfare state. If it were another country, this would be much higher, this column on the left side. But as you see, the inequality is unequally distributed. A second picture, you see that the threat to slide into poverty and to leave the core of society is also rising. So there are more people threatened by poverty as 10 years before or 15 years before, much more than in the 1960s or 1970s. That's really a big difference. The wealth in general has been rising since the 1960s. The net income and the regional, the domestic product, everything has risen, but the threat to be poor also has risen. On the other side, we have a good welfare system, so that's coupled by interventions of the state, of the public, but we have this fact. And above those, you see on the right side, who is especially hit. It's elderly people, it's people with many children, and it's, of course, it's immigrants, as we know, but there are some sectors of our society who are especially threatened. So this is also a challenge for the cities, and it's a challenge for the housing sector. And in Vienna, we focus very strong on housing policies. That has tradition. You mentioned before the Red Vienna, because housing policies is seen as a main part for intergenerational equilibrium, for peace, for stability of the society. So that's very special in Vienna, and the tradition comes from the Red Vienna to see housing policies as a main welfare action in society. In the last years, non-productive investments in land and property is a new asset class. You see, if you look at seminars, now at the moment every week I get one proposal for a seminar saying, oh, senior real estate is a rising property class and it's a big asset class. Every week. So you see that also the climate is going into invest in real estate, and you will win, you will have profit. It was always so, but in the moment it's a very strong tendency. On the other side, more and more people can't afford to live in metropolitan areas. I guess Munich had this problem in a high extent. Many people were leaving Munich. 20 years ago, many people, I know I have friends there, left London because they couldn't afford to live in London. And this is not only a social problem, it's also a problem of the cities, because they're getting empty and they are losing their creativity, their culture, because culture is not only money. Culture is more. It's a kind of climate. It's an atmosphere of the city. And even cities that are well prepared, like Vienna, are struck by this movement, and they are acting against. I will show you what Vienna does against. What is needed? Cities and local communities, they have to act, and they have to cooperate with the private sector. Not only do it alone in the old state-driven way of doing it, but in a kind of entrepreneurship, but in another sense, in a social sense. And cooperatives, as you know, are enterprises. They are not like Vereine or these enterprises, but they are enterprises for the common good of their members. That's very important, that the good and the good living situation of their members is in the focus. So we need this cooperation between the private sector, between people, individuals who are engaging in housing and doing good housing, and the public sector. And that's a kind of public-private partnership too, in another sense, because it's in a socially sound sense. So we need to build new, trustful and economically balanced relationships between different stakeholders, and new housing cooperatives can fulfill a role in this. They can be a model how to do it. We have to co-create good living conditions and ensure housing provision as a primary need of every person, and strengthen civil society and social cohesion. So I think that's, I don't know if everybody is sharing it, but I think everybody who's living in a city would like to have a good social climate, would like to have security, would like to have good chances for all the people living there. So let me tell you a little bit about the history of subsidized social housing. What are the origins? I told you that the origins are in the Habsburg monarchy. In the year 1910, before World War II, there was a Housing Care Act and fund, also a fund. There was a funding for housing care, for social housing. It wasn't named social housing, but it was an act for promoting affordable housing. And after World War II, there were also two acts, the Austrian Federal Housing and Settlement Fund. A fund was installed, and a housing subsidy law in the year 29, because everybody says, Vienna and Austria, they have a subsidy law, nobody can do it. It's an old law. It's almost 100 years old. It was very small. It was a very small fund, so it wasn't that big as it is now, but it was, the origins are from there. And the first movers of social housing in this time were small private cooperatives, and they emerged from the settlers movement after World War I. There was a big housing shortage after World War I, and there was a settlers movement of people who got in charge of land, of not used land, and made informal settlements, the same as favelas. This was a kind of favelas, and they existed until after World War II. In Vienna, there was a big area where now is the United Nations, so-called United Nations city. It was called Bretteldorf. I can't translate it. It was a kind of favela until 1950, I guess, or 55. So there were also informal settlements in Vienna, and these were the origins of the first big cooperatives, and they did settlements with their own work. It was kind of community neighboring work. Very famous examples in Vienna, for example, the Rosenhügel-Siedlung, very famous, nice kind of row houses that origin from that time, and that are several hundred flats, and the people there built them as neighbors. Everybody had to invest, I guess, 400 or 500 hours of manual labor work and build the house. And the houses were not. There was not clear who got the house, so the houses were, I don't know, in a lottery. They were given in a lottery, so nobody knew if he built his house or the house of the neighbor. So it was a kind of And this was one of the origins of this cooperative movement. And then there was a political difference, because the Social Democrats, or Socialist Party as they was named there, they didn't like those cooperatives because they were private institutions. Those were private people who were building their own homes, and the Socialist Party was a little bit, they were state-oriented. So they said housing should be given by the state and not done by private owners. And they set up the very world-famous Viennese council housing, the Red Vienna council housing, 65,000 flats built between 1923 and 1934. But it was a kind of counter-program against the cooperatives. Then, I mean, politically, there was no clash of different attitudes, but it was kind of alternative housing program. Then after the war, in 1947, the Association of Limited Profit Housing Associations was founded with the target to rebuild the after the war destroyed Austria, and to especially focused on socially bound welfare housing. This association was a inter-party association. It was not only the Social Democrats, it was also the Conservative Party. So it was a broad movement in society to get welfare and socially bound welfare housing done. In 1954, a renewed federal housing subsidy law was established and underpinned by a very strong financial support fed by income taxes. That's until now. So it's a system that shares part of the income taxes to the subsidy system for housing. And these two factors, the foundation of the limited profit housing associations and the federal housing subsidy law, which lasts until now. We have a very strong non-profit housing sector, and we have a very strong subsidy system. That resulted in a massive startup of limited profit housing associations, continuing until now, and it has a big share on the Austrian real estate and housing sector. About 1 million apartments out of approximately 4 were built by those housing associations until today, and about 67,000 apartments, or 16.5% of overall Austrian apartment stock, are still driven, owned and rented by and given to rent by the limited profit housing associations. And on the contrary, and that's the little bit paradox situation, because the more those housing corporations came up and got strength, the more the cooperatives, the old cooperatives, lost terror. That's a little bit funny, because there was always the argument, we have a strong housing sector, privately owned, and this limited profiting sector. So the cooperative housing is difficult because there are many members, it's difficult to administrate and things like that. And it costs terrain for this sector. I mean, it's almost not weak, as you say, but it was a kind of shifting between cooperative and corporate non-profit housing. What is the characteristics of this sector? There is a regulation of financial conduct. That means also the conduct of the company itself. It cannot act like a privately owned corporation. There's a very strong law. You see it on the last row. There's a non-profit housing law. It's a very strong law. It's a very important law in Austria, and it regulates also how those companies can act, what rents they can get, long-term predetermination of rents, special privileges for the owner, for the tenants, and also owners, because they also build private property, not only rental houses. Then they have a principle of cost coverage. They cannot make profits in the first line. They have to do housing at the cost it has, and not with extra profits. They have a certain margin concerning financiation and things, but it's a strong regulation. And they have the obligation to reinvest every profit they make. Therefore, limited profit, and they have to reinvest it in the housing sector, in the affordable or non-profit housing sector. There is no control of the ownership of those companies. They are privately owned. There are private persons who own them. There are banks, insurances, trade unions, so different owners of those companies. It's very broad ownership. They only have the obligation to obey this law and the protection of their owners and tenants. It's a high achievement in terms of social security, but in some aspects it constricts civil initiative. That's why we talk in Vienna and in Austria that we have a very good welfare system, but it also strangles a little bit the civil society, because civil initiative is a little bit contained in this public welfare system. And that's different, for example, to Switzerland and even especially to Switzerland and to the Netherlands, because in the Netherlands and Switzerland, private initiative is a very high value, and also new cooperatives, they also act out of this private initiative. So that's a kind of dual-faced system. What was the timeline of social and cooperative housing? I told you first, after the World War II and slightly before, there were those housing cooperatives, then grassroots housing, workers' cooperatives, a lot of workers, and then afterwards, from 1923 on, the Red Vienna Council housing with 65,000 houses erected, until now, very famous. Lots of delegations come and look at those buildings. In the fascism, there was a sharp decrease of building production, except in the industrial sector, where workers' homes were erected. We got a heavy industry sector. The steel industry comes from the fascist time. The Linz, very well-known big steel plant was called Hermann Göring Werke then. It was a foundation of fascism, and they erected also thousands of workers' homes. Then after, that's a picture of this, what I told you before, where the people are working together and building their own houses. They made it of bricks, and you see there Also, the brick production was made on the location. Then, after World War II, there was reconstruction and massive rise of so-called limited profit housing and also council housing. Moreover, and from 1974 until today, also urban renewal, also a very famous program where private house owners are supported in renewing their building stock, and on the other side they have to guarantee low rents for 15 years or 20 years. So it's a kind of bargain. You get money for renovation, and you lower or you limit the rents, and that has caused a very good standard of the building stock in Austria. And there was also a second subsidy scheme. It's called Tevosan, where all the houses from the 60s were renovated. I think that's also a very important thing, that in the future we can't build. We have to deal with a built environment, and we also have to think in cooperative terms about the built environment. Yes, and then from 1995 to today, the developers competitions, you mentioned it. It means quality competition, competition for subsidies. Yeah, what are Vienna housing policies in a short glance? There are 930,000 inhabited flats in Vienna. 208,000 apartments are owned by the city. That's the council housing. And 195,000 apartments by those limited profit housing companies. So in the whole, almost half of the apartment stock in Vienna is owned by either the city of Vienna or social housing companies. More than 50% of Viennese citizens, including also immigrants, are living in socially bound housing. So that's the middle class. It's not housing for the poor. The middle class in Vienna is living in those houses. What are the characteristics? I told you we have some big old cooperatives with up to 8,000 members. You have to think they have general assemblies where 8,000 people can meet, and it's the the most important leading organ of this company. It's not the fact. There are not 8,000 people coming, but it's in the basis. It's basic cooperatives. But the small ones, the small cooperatives, they have vanished during the last 30-40 years. They were bought by other corporate limited profit companies because they couldn't afford their everyday life business, because they didn't have building activities, they had too little economic potential, and they were sold to big companies. So there are only a few small ones left, and in the principle, two big cooperatives. Social housing in Vienna is defined as socially bound housing. There was a dispute, we discussed it yesterday. Netherlands accused Viennese subsidy system, and they went to the European Court because they said it's not allowed to give subsidies to middle class people. Subsidies are only for poor. Housing for the poor. It was rejected, so we have the subsidy system any longer. Yeah, and on the other side, Vienna has strong prevention measures against homelessness. We also have special programs in the social housing sector for homeless people. It's called Housing First. So you want to bring people in they have their first flat after being homeless. So it's also a program there. And the housing stock in Vienna is overwhelmingly rental buildings. It's not private owners. There are also cooperatives with private-owned individuals, but it's rental buildings. Is a policy, affordable good housing for all, I told you, more of 50% of the Viennese, and it's a middle-class program. 10 minutes left, okay. There are different subsidy schemes. There are programs for special needs, a stable financing system, a mix of new construction and urban renewal, and creating mixed neighborhoods, avoiding social ghettos. That's the program of the housing sector. And overall quality above commercial housing standards. And in 1995, there was introduced the scheme of competition for public subsidies. So all the housing companies have to appeal for public subsidies. They don't get it. And there are also property developers competitions. That means that the procurement funds of the city are giving lots for building new social housing to the companies, but they have to compete under each other for getting those. It was a hard thing. There were three categories then: urban design and architecture, urban and building ecology, and building costs and rent conditions. Take the next slide. What was the consequence? Fairly better architectural concepts, sharp rise in building ecology. We soon reached energy standard, very low energy standard, and the total building costs fell by more than 10% in the first 2 years. So the qualities were rising really dramatically, and the costs fell. This was competition, but competition for subsidies. In 2009, a new fourth category was introduced, social sustainability. That's what you talked about, because we saw that it's not enough to have good housing and good buildings, but also to have a soul, social soul in the houses, and to bring people together and to have neighborhood activities and have common rooms and common facilities. This introduction reduced in a bundle of different measures on the social level of housing, but in the foreground it was the reason why this cooperation between private groups and the sector, the big limited profit sector, arose, because this was caused by social sustainability, because the companies saw there are people who want to be self-reigned, they want to administrate themselves, they want to be neighbors in their communities, and we need it. We combine this and have the strength of the limited profit housing sector and the creativity and the social attitudes of those groups. Yes, that's some figures. I think you get the slides and you can look at the figures what happened in this developers competitions. What is the characteristics of the subsidy system? There is a mixture of inexpensive public loans with fixed low interest rates. Also it's 1% for 40 years for about 600 euros per square meter. So it's a high extent of it's not a gift. You have to pay it back, but and it also is a revolving fund, so it comes back. But it's if you count, we are also calculating projects. It's a big deal. It has a big impact on rents. So the rents are about 15 to 40% below market level. What are recent challenges? I will strive it. We have an economic rally, and because the real estate is such an attractive asset class, the land prices raise really dramatically, sharply. About in the beginning of the 2000s until the middle, it was about 400 euros per square meter of apartment area, and nowadays it's 2,000 euros. So it's, I mean, in Munich, I guess it's for 15 years, it's above 1,000 euros or 1,500, but in Vienna it was very low, and it adapted the level of attractive European capitals, or reached the level now. But this was a dramatic impact on social housing, because subsidies for social housing are only given if the land costs are not further than 300 euros per square meter. And you see, 2,000, that will not work. So the social housing the social housing project decreased after that. Many of the newly produced flats were sold as investment properties are not rent and are staying vacant. So we have a housing production of apartments that are vacant. That's not only the social housing sector decreases, but also the newly built apartments partially are vacant. So what did the community do, the city do? At first, it developed big areas, big brownfields in the city. It started in the 15 years before, but it was forced then afterwards to have reserves of land in the inner city and also in the periphery, and there were agreements and bargains with those institutional owners, and this was the railway company, for example, or the military. So it was possible to make arrangements, to bargain. If you make a certain amount of social housing, we give you another amount of in the land zoning, as it's similar to Munich, for your own private development. And this was not enough. So in 2019, the city introduced a new legal act with a new land zoning category, social housing. So in the future, every lot of land who wants to get a new land zoning plan, not the old ones, has to have 2/3 of usable floor space dedicated to social housing, exceeding spending not more than 300 euros per square meter. So that's a kind of market intervention. They had a lot of scruples to do it because of legal concerns, but it was introduced, and I think it's an interesting way how it will come. So, how many minutes do you have? 5. Okay. So we have different. I told you that there were those cooperations between the big housing companies and the cooperatives, small cooperatives or groups who are interested. And there are several big areas. That's the example where the market prices are under how do you say, this big area development. One is Aspern, die Seestadt Wien, very big area, 100 hectares just developed. There are, I guess, in the meantime, 10, can you help me? 10 housing groups or something in this area. And they were used to bring innovation and social innovation into this area, and it worked. It's a really fine mixture. The second one is an area close to the Vienna railway station. There is also a large share of community-oriented projects. It's not subsidized housing, only a small part, but it's a commercial housing, but mixed with social groups. And Evelyn will show you we have one project in the DieWogen in this area. The third one is an area outside, a little bit at the periphery, the Wildgarten Vienna, also about 4 groups and one special group with low-level cooperation, kind of co-housing on a institutional company level. One of the posters of Wildgarten. Yeah, and there's also, this shows how one of those processes is set up. Participation of neighbors. And we also have a scheme that's kind of a spin-off of this cooperation between groups and housing companies. We have also like housing groups light. So in the normal housing sectors there is extended participation of the people, or in the planning phase, but also in the using phase. So that's also a little bit trickling into the system, into those companies. Yes, pioneers, but I think I will be quick because there will be lots of pioneers in the afternoon. Maybe I skip this. This is, you know, Sargfabrik is one of the pioneers. I also have brought some Zürich, but you will see it. Skip it. What is the importance and what's the typology of new cooperative housing in Vienna? In Switzerland, you know, there are very small cooperatives. They are very bound to individual gestion, and in Austria, it's very common in Switzerland. That's not common in Austria. and we have a remarkable renaissance during the last 2 decades. I think the cooperative movement also has a renaissance on the international level, not only in the housing sector, and that's a kind of counterbalance to the economic development in general. The situation I told you in Austria is not so easy, and there are groups since the 1980s, and also building groups now. That means groups that are economically responsible for the estates. In the moment, we have more than 20 building groups projects in the last 10 years. Some of, I think, about 10 are just emerging, so it's a really emerging sector. There are 3 types of cooperation. The first one is housing groups that cooperate with the main social housing sector. That's what I told you. The second one is new public welfare-oriented property developers like DieWogen. You will present it. And the third one is really co-owners associations. That's a little bit the type that in Germany and Switzerland takes place. Yeah, it has rather low economic impact. About 0.25 per mille of the Austrian housing stock is now new cooperatives. It's not very big. Yeah, it has a big media presence and big presence, but it's economically it's not very important. Yes, DieWogen, you will see afterwards. What are the social types of these these cooperative housing projects? They are pragmatic projects. That's the ownership projects in the main. They are ideological, that have a strong political attitude and raised because of social and political movements. The Sargfabrik is one of them, but there's also spiritual backgrounds like Brot. They have 4 projects, and it's a kind of ideology. It's the way that we want to make it better. We want to make a better society. And the third one is the low threshold projects. That's the projects that are done with non-profit building associations. Yeah, and different involvements, intensive, light. So we have a very big spectrum of different types of involvement of the people in those groups. Yes, financing hurdles, you can read. I give you some. I have to hurry. So you have some of the projects. We did it with Katharina, with Science Architecture. It's a project and one of the pioneering projects, and was also sold partially by this non-profit company. That's a model that's not. Yes. Yes. You see here the. No? Doesn't like. Huh? The right one, you see that's the CEO of a non-profit housing company, of a big one, at the opening, at the foundation stone laying. So it's also a little bit different climate when you do such a project. I think it's. Where is the? Where do I have to point? Ah, yeah. Okay. No? Maybe the battery is not. What? No. It works? How it works? Yeah, it works. I'm just almost finished. That's another project with the same company, Lisa. 23 nations living in this project. No, it doesn't work. Ah, yeah. No. Also in urban renewal, we have such projects. That's a renewal of an old house in the 16th district. Yeah, that's my last slides. Co-housing groups are not only building houses and inhabiting housing, they are also influencing the surrounding. They are doing something for the surrounding. and that's also a fact that's used by the city and the housing sector to revive districts and to make positive and extra social benefits. You see here, that's left is Sargfabrik. We have done now we have a Wohnstrasse and a market every week, so it's also an impulse for the surrounding and the people around. Yes. How can you foster? How can you promote those little groups? You can make special application procedures for cooperatives and building groups, like we have competitions in Vienna, who are done for those groups. You can install conceptual procedures for the allocation of real estate. That's done in Germany. They make it's called Konzeptwettbewerbe, concept competitions, where you can appeal with a concept, not only with architecture, but also with how you use this plot. You can sell municipal properties to cooperatives, as in Munich, as is done in Munich, referred to cooperatives. You can make hereditary lease models. Lease models, that's a model that how the city won't sell their property. Maybe that's a model for your next. No, could be, because the city keeps their property and has a social impact in leasing the land. And you can use housing foundations. Okay, thank you. I wish you good luck.